She sat in the witness box, tears streaming down her pale cheeks, painting the wife as an unhinged, violent monster. The courtroom held its breath, entirely captivated by the mistress's sob story. But the black woman sitting at the defense table didn't flinch. She just tapped her phone and smiled. The air inside courtroom 304 of the Cook County Courthouse was thick with the suffocating tension that only a bitter, high-stakes divorce could produce. The polished mahogany walls seemed to close in around the gallery, where a smattering of reporters and nosy legal aides sat, practically leaning forward in their seats. At the center of it all sat Daisy Henderson. Daisy was 38, a self-made powerhouse in the tech logistics industry, and striking. Her deep mocha skin was flawless, her natural hair styled in an elegant structural updo that commanded respect. She wore a tailored navy blue blazer over a crisp white blouse suit that screamed professionalism, control, and unapologetic power. But today her husband's legal team was doing everything in their power to strip her of that dignity. They were determined to paint her not as the brilliant betrayed wife, but as a bitter, volatile aggressor. The age-old weaponized trope of the angry black woman was being subtly but purposefully woven into the narrative, thread by malicious thread. Across the aisle sat Lucien Henderson, her husband of 10 years, the man she had built an empire with, or rather, the man who had ridden her coattails while wearing the expensive charcoal Tom Ford suits her company's dividends had paid for. Lucien looked the part of the weary, victimized spouse to perfection. He sat with his shoulders slightly slumped, his handsome face etched with practiced exhaustion, occasionally casting fearful glances toward Daisy's table. But the true star of Lucien's fabricated tragedy was currently on the witness stand. Chloe Montgomery, 26 years old, former junior marketing assistant, current professional homewrecker. Chloe was dressed in a soft, oversized beige cardigan and a modest floral skirt, clutching a crumpled tissue in her trembling hands. She looked small, fragile, and utterly terrified, a performance worthy of a daytime Emmy. "Miss Montgomery," began Richard Gallo, Lucien's slick, high-priced attorney, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Can you tell the court what happened on the evening of November 12th? Chloe sniffled, dabbing at her dry eyes. She took a shuddering breath, looking beseechingly up at the presiding judge, the Honorable Thomas Harrison. "Lucien and I we were just having coffee. We were trying to figure out how to handle the situation respectfully. We knew Daisy was hurting and Lucien just wanted a peaceful separation." Daisy felt a hard knot of pure disgust twist in her stomach. A peaceful separation. Lucien had systematically drained 3 of their joint investment accounts, forging Daisy's signature to funnel over $600,000 into an offshore LLC registered under Chloe's name. "And then what happened?" Gallo prompted, stepping closer to the witness box, playing the role of the protective shield. "She found us," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking perfectly on the last syllable. Daisy barged into the cafe. She was completely out of control. Her eyes were wild. She started screaming obscenities at me, calling me horrible names. Chloe buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with silent, tearless sobs. She grabbed a hot cup of coffee and threw it at me. If Lucien hadn't pulled me out of the way, I would have been severely burned. Then she leaned in, right in my face, and whispered that she was going to ruin my life, that she would make sure I ended up in a body bag if I didn't leave Lucien alone. A collective gasp echoed from the back of the courtroom. Judge Harrison frowned, his bushy white eyebrows knitting together as he looked down at Daisy. At the defense table, Daisy's attorney, Arthur Pendleton, leaned over. Arthur was a silver-haired legal veteran, a man who had seen every dirty trick in family court and dismantled most of them. "Don't react, Daisy," he murmured, barely moving his lips. Let them dig the hole. The deeper they dig, the harder the fall. Daisy didn't need the reminder. She kept her face an impassive mask of stone. She didn't glare. She didn't scoff. She simply picked up her Mont Blanc pen and made a neat, deliberate note on her legal pad. She knew exactly what had happened on November 12th. She had walked into that cafe completely composed and handed Lucian a manila envelope containing time-stamped photos of him and Chloe entering a boutique hotel, along with the preliminary divorce filing. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't thrown coffee. She had simply said, "I'm done carrying dead weight, Lucy," and walked out. That Gallo was putting on a master class in character assassination. "Miss Montgomery, how did this prolonged campaign of terror affect you?" "I couldn't sleep," Chloe whimpered, looking directly at the judge now. "I had to quit my job. I was terrified to walk to my own car. Every time I saw a black SUV, my heart stopped, thinking it was her. She's so powerful, Your Honor. She has money, she has connections, I'm just a normal person. Lucian and I just wanted to love each other in peace, but she made it her mission to destroy us. She even threatened to fabricate evidence to ruin Lucian's career." "Objection," Arthur said calmly, half standing. "Hearsay and lack of foundation." "Sustained," Judge Harrison grumbled. "Counsel, move it along." "Nothing further for this witness at this time, Your Honor," Gallo said, looking incredibly satisfied with himself. He shot a smug, triumphant look at Arthur as he returned to his seat next to Lucian. Lucian reached over and squeezed Gallo's arm in gratitude. Daisy stared at her husband's hand, the same hand that had slipped a 2-carat diamond ring onto Chloe's finger just 3 weeks ago, a ring purchased with funds from Daisy's personal business account before she caught on and froze him out. The sheer audacity of the pair was staggering. They weren't just trying to get a favorable divorce settlement, they were trying to ruin Daisy entirely. They wanted the house, a massive chunk of her company, and a permanent restraining order that would publicly brand Daisy as a violent abuser, effectively destroying her reputation in the corporate world. They thought they had her cornered. They thought her silence over the last few months was a sign of defeat. They thought they were the smartest people in the room. Daisy tapped her phone screen, making sure the digital file was queued up. "Let them act," she thought to herself. "Every play has its final act." The afternoon session began with Lucian taking the stand. If Chloe had played the terrified victim, Lucian was playing the noble martyr. He adjusted his tie, giving the judge a respectful, weary nod before taking the oath. Gallo approached him with the gentle demeanor of a grief counselor. "Mr. Henderson, let's talk about the finances," Gallo said, flipping open a thick binder. "Your wife claims you misappropriated funds, but let's look at the reality of your marriage. Who managed the household accounts?" "Daisy did," Lucian lied smoothly. "She always had to be in control of everything. My career, our social life, our bank accounts. If I spent more than $100 on a business lunch, she would interrogate me. I was essentially on an allowance in my own marriage." Daisy's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Lucian hadn't paid a utility bill in his entire life. When his boutique investment firm had faced bankruptcy 3 years ago, it was Daisy who had quietly bailed him out, injecting $250,000 to keep him afloat to save his pride. She had given him the world, asking only for partnership and loyalty in return. "And when you finally found the courage to leave this emotionally abusive situation," Gallo continued, "what did Daisy do?" Lucian let out a heavy sigh, looking down at his hands. "She froze me out, literally. She changed the passwords to the accounts, locked me out of our home, and told me she would leave me with nothing. She said, and I quote, 'I am going to bury you so deep you won't even be able to see daylight.' That's when she started coming after Chloe." Gallo turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have presented sworn affidavits from Mr. D. Henderson and Miss Montgomery. We've established a pattern of coercive control, financial abuse, and physical threats from Mrs. Henderson. My client was forced to transfer funds simply to secure legal representation and a safe place to live, away from his wife's volatile outbursts. Arthur Pendleton leaned back in his chair, tapping his chin. To the untrained eye, Daisy's case looked bleak. Gallo had done a phenomenal job of muddying the waters, burying the court in circumstantial garbage and highly emotional, albeit entirely fabricated, testimony. "They're painting you into a corner, Daisy," Arthur whispered, pouring her a glass of water. "Judge Harrison is traditional. He hates messy domestic disputes. If he buys into this narrative that you're an aggressive, vindictive spouse, he's going to grant the restraining order and award Lucian spousal support to balance the scales." "I know," Daisy replied, her voice a calm, smooth baritone. "Let Lucian talk. He always loved the sound of his own voice. It's his biggest weakness." Gallo spent another hour leading Lucian through a labyrinth of half-truths and outright perjury. Lucian testified that Daisy was never home, that she prioritized her company over their marriage, and that her rage issues had alienated all their mutual friends. He painted a picture of a man driven into the arms of a younger, kinder woman, out of sheer desperation and survival. "Mr. Henderson," Gallo asked, his voice echoing in the quiet courtroom, "are you afraid of your wife?" Lucian looked directly at Daisy for the first time that day. He locked eyes with her, trying to summon a look of intimidation, but Daisy saw right through it. She saw the coward underneath the Tom Ford suit. "Yes," Lucian said, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm terrified of her. She has the resources to make good on her threats. I just want to move on with my life with Chloe and be left in peace." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," Gallo said, nodding solemnly. He walked back to his table. "Your witness, Mr. Pendleton." Arthur stood up slowly. He buttoned his suit jacket, took off his reading glasses, and walked to the podium. He didn't carry any notes. He didn't carry a binder. He just carried the quiet, lethal confidence of a man who held the winning hand. "Mr. Henderson," Arthur began, his voice friendly, almost conversational. "You stated earlier that my client, Daisy, was financially controlling, that you were on an allowance. Is that correct?" "Yes," Lucian said defensively. "Interesting," Arthur noted. "Tell me, Mr. Henderson, what is the current balance of the Zenith Trust offshore account in the Cayman Islands?" Gallo shot out of his chair. "Objection. Relevance. This account is outside the jurisdiction of this court's standard discovery, and we've already established—" "I'll allow it," Judge Harrison interrupted, leaning forward. "But tie it together quickly, Mr. Pendleton." Lucian shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure of the exact balance." "Let me help you," Arthur said, pulling a single sheet of paper from his pocket. As of Tuesday, the balance was $642,000. An account registered on September 3rd. Can you tell the court who the primary beneficiary of that account is? Lucian swallowed hard. "I believe it might be Chloe." "It is," Arthur confirmed. "Now, September 3rd. That was 2 full months before the cafe incident on November 12th, correct? 2 months before you claim you were forced to transfer funds for survival. In fact, Mr. Henderson, didn't you withdraw those funds directly from the equity line on the house Daisy purchased before your marriage?" We were married." "It was marital money," Lucian stammered, the victim persona cracking slightly under pressure. "It was Daisy's business capital, Mr. Henderson," Arthur corrected sharply. "You didn't flee an abusive marriage, sir. You planned a heist, and you used your mistress as the getaway driver." "Objection." Badgering the witness, Gallo shouted. Sustained. "Dial it back, Mr. Pendleton," the judge warned. "Apologies, Your Honor," Arthur said, not sounding sorry at all. I have no further questions for Mr. Henderson at this time, but I would like to recall Miss Chloe Montgomery to the stand." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Chloe looked up, her eyes widening in panic. Lucien stepped down from the stand, his face flushed red, refusing to look at his lawyer. As Chloe made her way back to the witness box, Daisy finally allowed herself a small, icy smile. The trap was laid. It was time to snap it shut. Chloe Montgomery took the oath for the second time, her hands shaking visibly now. The beige cardigan didn't look quite as innocent anymore. It just looked cheap under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. Arthur Pendleton approached the podium, his demeanor entirely changed. The conversational tone was gone, replaced by the surgical precision of an interrogator. "Miss Montgomery, I want to revisit your earlier testimony," Arthur said, his voice ringing with authority. "You swore under oath that Daisy Henderson terrorized you, that she threatened your life in a cafe on November 12th. "Yes," Chloe whispered. "You also testified that you were living in a constant state of fear, that you quit your job and hid from her. You painted a picture of a woman entirely victimized by my client's unprovoked rage. Is that an accurate summary of your sworn testimony today?" Chloe looked at Gallo, who gave her a subtle, tight nod. "Yes, it's the truth. Miss Montgomery, I want to direct your attention to the evening of October 28th, approximately 2 weeks before the cafe incident. Do you recall where you were on that night?" Chloe hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. I don't know. Probably at home." "Let me refresh your memory," Arthur said. "Were you not at the Henderson residence, specifically the primary residence in the Gold Coast neighborhood?" Lucien visibly stiffened at the defense table. Gallo frowned, scribbling furiously on his notepad. I might have been," Chloe stammered. "Lucien invited me over. He said Daisy was out of town at a logistics conference in Seattle. He felt safe enough to have me there. So, you entered the home of the woman who supposedly terrified you, the woman you claim you were hiding from, to spend the night in her bed with her husband?" Arthur asked, raising an eyebrow. "Objection," Gallo snapped. "Argumentative." "Overruled," Judge Harrison said, his eyes locked on Chloe. "The witness will answer." "Lucien told me it was safe," Chloe insisted, her voice rising an octave. "We were just talking, planning our future. We were terrified she would come back early and attack us." "Planning your future," Arthur repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "Miss Montgomery, during this planning session on October 28th, did you and Mr. Henderson discuss the divorce settlement?" "No," Chloe lied quickly. "Too quickly. We just talked about our feelings." Arthur turned to the judge. "Your Honor, at this time the defense would like to introduce Exhibit F into evidence." Gallo sprang up. "Objection. We have not been provided with any Exhibit F in discovery. This is an ambush." Arthur held up a silver flash drive. "Your Honor, the defense only came into possession of this specific audio file late last night. It was extracted from a home security device, specifically a voice-activated smart home assistant located in the living room of Mrs. Henderson's personal residence. As the primary account holder and resident of the home, my client is legally entitled to all data recorded by her own security network. It directly impeaches the testimony of both Mr. Henderson and Miss Montgomery." Judge Harrison peered over his glasses. He looked at Gallo's panicked face, then at Daisy's stoic composure. "I will allow it, but this better be good, Mr. Burr. Pendleton, if this is a parlor trick, I will hold you in contempt." "No trick, Your Honor," Arthur said. He walked over to the court clerk and handed over the flash drive. "Track 1, please." The courtroom fell dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Daisy sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly on the table. She remembered the sheer devastation of listening to this recording for the first time in her hotel room in Seattle. The betrayal had burned like acid in her veins, but now the fire was cold. Now it was a weapon. A slight static hiss echoed through the courtroom speakers, followed by the crisp, unmistakable sound of a wine glass being set on a marble countertop. Then a voice, Chloe's voice. But it wasn't the trembling, fragile whisper she had used on the stand. It was sharp, arrogant, and dripping with malicious laughter. God, Lucian, look at this place. The art alone is worth millions. How much longer do I have to pretend to be scared of that stuck-up bitch? A collective gasp ripped through the gallery. Chloe's face drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen gray. She gripped the edges of the witness stand so hard her knuckles turned white. Then came Lucian's voice, smooth and relaxed, completely devoid of the wariness he had performed earlier. Just stick to the plan, babe. Gallo said if we push the domestic abuse angle, judges eat that up, especially with a woman like Daisy. We frame her as the angry, violent wife, and she'll settle out of court just to save her company's PR. We get the house, we get half the liquid assets, and she gets a restraining order. On the recording, Chloe laughed again, a cruel, high-pitched sound that echoed ominously off the courtroom walls. I still can't believe she hasn't noticed the Zenith account transfers. Chloe's recorded voice continued. You're a genius, but what if she refuses to settle? What if she actually fights us? There was the sound of ice clinking in a glass. Then Lucien spoke again, his words sealing his own fate. Then we fabricate an incident. We'll pick a fight in public. You play the crying victim, and I'll testify that she threatened to kill you. Daisy is too proud to cause a scene. She'll just walk away, and we'll have all the witnesses we need to file the police report. By the time we're done, she won't have a shred of credibility left. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and utterly deafening. The silence in courtroom 304 was absolute, thick, and suffocating. It was the kind of silence that follows a catastrophic car crash, right before the screaming begins. For 10 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. Chloe stood frozen in the witness box, her mouth slightly ajar, the color completely drained from her face. At the defense table, Daisy simply crossed her legs, brushing an invisible piece of lint off her navy blue blazer. She didn't look triumphant. She looked bored. That, more than anything, seemed to terrify her husband. Richard Gallo was the first to break the paralysis. He leaped to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. Your Honor, Gallo bellowed, his normally slick voice cracking with panic. I fiercely object. This is an outrageous violation of the law. Illinois is a strict two-party consent state regarding audio recordings. Neither my client nor Miss Montgomery consented to being recorded in that home. This evidence is illegally obtained, inadmissible fruit of the poisonous tree, and I demand it be stricken from the record immediately. Judge Harrison slowly took off his reading glasses. His face, previously set in a mask of impartial judicial fatigue, was now a thundercloud of pure, unadulterated fury. He didn't look at Gallo. He looked right at Arthur Pendleton. Mr. Pendleton, the judge growled, his voice dangerously low. You were walking a razor-thin line. Care to explain why I shouldn't throw this out and sanction you for introducing it? Arthur didn't flinch. He walked calmly to the center of the room. I am well aware of the Illinois eavesdropping statute, Your Honor. However, there are two crucial exceptions that make this recording perfectly admissible. Tuck. Arthur held up a single index finger. First, the device in question is a commercially available smart home assistant installed and registered to Daisy Henderson. It operates on a wake word protocol. We have the metadata from the device's server, which I submitted to the clerk along with the audio file. Miss Montgomery triggered the recording herself when she loudly said, God, Lucian, which the device misinterpreted as its wake word command. There was no intentional wiretapping. It was an accidental activation caused by the witness's own shouting in a house she did not own. Arthur raised a second finger. More importantly, Your Honor, the eavesdropping statute contains a specific exemption under 720 IEGE 514(3)(I). A recording made without consent is legally permissible if it is done to obtain evidence of a suspected crime, and the party making the recording has reasonable suspicion that the crime is about to be committed. My client suspected her husband of committing criminal fraud, forgery, and extortion. This recording captures the two individuals actively conspiring to commit perjury and extort my client through the fabrication of domestic violence charges. Gallo slammed his fist on his table. That is absurd. You cannot preemptively bug your own living room on a hunch. It wasn't a bug, Richard. It was a speaker sitting in plain sight on a marble kitchen island. Arthur shot back, his voice echoing like a whip crack. He turned back to the bench. Your Honor, they are using this court as a weapon. They lied under oath today in your presence to steal my client's assets and destroy her life. Judge Harrison stared at the flash drive in the clerk's hand, then shifted his gaze to the witness box. Chloe was visibly shaking now, her carefully constructed victim persona dissolving into a puddle of genuine, hyperventilating panic. The objection is overruled, Judge Harrison declared, slamming his gavel down. The sound made Lucian physically jump in his seat. The recording speaks for itself, and given the implications of extortion and perjury happening in my courtroom, I am admitting it into evidence. Gallo sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. Now, Judge Harrison continued, leaning over the bench, his eyes boring into Chloe. Miss Montgomery, let me remind you that you are still under oath. The penalty for perjury in this state is up to 5 years in a state penitentiary. I suggest you think very, very carefully before you open your mouth again. Did you or did you not fabricate the story about the cafe incident on November 12th? Chloe burst into tears. But these weren't the delicate, sympathetic tears from an hour ago. These were ugly, gasping, terrified sobs. She looked desperately at Lucian, pleading silently for him to save her. But Lucian was staring straight ahead, refusing to meet her eyes, visibly calculating how to save his own skin. Seeing that her protector had abandoned her, the instinct for self-preservation kicked in. Chloe gripped the microphone. It was his idea. She shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Lucian. Lucian told me to do it. He said if we didn't get the restraining order, Daisy would bankrupt us. He told me what to say on the stand. He bought the coffee and told me to pour it on myself before the police arrived. I didn't want to do it, I swear. You lying bitch. Lucian roared, jumping to his feet, entirely forgetting where he was. The facade of the weary, abused husband vanished, replaced by the ugly, venomous grifter he truly was. You wanted the house. You told me she was too stupid to check the offshore accounts. Order, Judge Harrison bellowed, slamming his gavel repeatedly. Bailiff, have Mr. Henderson sit down and shut his mouth before I hold him in contempt and have him thrown in a holding cell. The uniformed bailiff stepped toward Lucian, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder and forcing him back into his chair. Lucian was panting, his face flushed an ugly, mottled purple. Daisy watched her husband implode. 10 years. She had spent 10 years building a life with this man. She had covered his failures, celebrated his mediocre successes, and loved him fiercely. To see him reduced to this, a sweating, screaming liar, turning on his mistress the second the spotlight hit him, didn't break her heart. It just solidified the cold, hard steel that had taken up residence in her chest. Mr. Gallo, the judge said, his voice dripping with disgust. "Do you have any further questions for this witness?" Wio Gore stood up slowly, looking completely defeated. "No, Your Honor. The petitioner rests." "Wise choice," Judge Harrison muttered. "Court is in recess for 1 hour. I suggest counsel use this time to have a very serious conversation with their clients about the reality of their situation. Because when we reconvene, I am going to make a ruling, and I promise you I am not in a forgiving mood." The hallway outside courtroom 304 was a flurry of hushed whispers and frantic footsteps. The moment the heavy oak doors swung shut behind them, Richard Gallo intercepted Arthur and Daisy before they could reach their private consultation room. Lucian trailed behind his lawyer, looking like a dead man walking. Chloe was nowhere to be seen, having practically sprinted toward the women's restroom the moment she was excused from the stand. "Arthur, Daisy, wait," Gallo said, holding up his hands in a gesture of surrender. The arrogance from the morning session had been entirely scrubbed from his demeanor. "Let's be reasonable here. Emotions are running high. We can settle this right now, outside of court, and save everyone a lot of unnecessary pain." Daisy stopped. She turned slowly, her heels kicking sharply on the marble floor. She looked at Gallo, and then she looked at Lucian. She didn't say a word, letting the silence stretch out until Lucian shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her gaze. "Reasonable?" Arthur chuckled, adjusting his suit jacket. "Richard, 20 minutes ago you were trying to convince a judge that my client was a violent psychopath. What exactly does your version of reasonable look like now?" Gallo swallowed hard. "Lucian is willing to drop the petition for the restraining order immediately. We will also agree to an uncontested divorce. He'll walk away from the business assets entirely. All he asks is to keep the $600,000 currently in the Zenith Trust and a modest spousal support stipend for 2 years to help him transition. It's a clean break." Daisy finally spoke. Her voice was smooth, quiet, and carried the devastating weight of an absolute zero temperature. "A transition," she repeated. "You steal my money, attempt to destroy my reputation, commit perjury in a court of law, and you want me to pay for your transition." "Daisy, please," Lucian pleaded, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. Things just... they got out of hand. Chloe got in my head. She's young. She's greedy. I never wanted to hurt you this badly. Just let me keep the Zenith account. You make that much in a quarter. You won't even miss it. Let me start over." Daisy took a step closer to him. Lucian instinctively leaned back against the wall. "You always were a parasite, Lucian," she said softly, her eyes locked onto his. "You couldn't build anything yourself, so you attached yourself to me. When you got bored, you attached yourself to her, and now that she's useless to you, you're trying to attach yourself to my pity. But I don't pity you, I despise you." She turned to Gallo. "There is no deal. We go back in there, and I take everything. Mrs. Henderson, be pragmatic," Gallo urged, his desperation showing. "If we go back in there, the judge is going to refer this to the district attorney. Lucian goes down, but it drags your name through a criminal trial as the victim. The press will have a field day. Your company's board of directors won't like the optics of a messy public fraud scandal." Arthur laughed a booming, genuine laugh that echoed down the hallway. "Oh, Richard, you really didn't do your homework, did you?" Gallo frowned. "What are you talking about?" You'll see in about 10 minutes, Arthur smiled, placing a hand on Daisy's back and guiding her toward their room. "Better warn your client to loosen his tie. It's going to get hard to breathe." When court reconvened, the atmosphere had entirely shifted. The gallery was practically buzzing with anticipation. Judge Harrison took the bench with a face carved out of granite. "Mr. Pendleton," the judge prompted, "does the defense have any witnesses to call?" "Just one, Your Honor," Arthur said. I called Daisy Henderson to the stand. Daisy walked to the witness box with the same flawless posture she brought to executive board meetings. She took the oath, her voice clear and unwavering, and sat down. Mrs. Henderson, Arthur began, your husband testified that you financially abused him and that he was forced to transfer $642,000 to an offshore account simply to survive. Is that true? No, Daisy stated simply. I fully supported Lucian. When his boutique investment firm, Vanguard Capital, faced insolvency 3 years ago, I personally injected $250,000 into his operating budget to save him from bankruptcy. And did that firm succeed? No. He squandered the capital on exorbitant client dinners, golf club memberships, and eventually expensive gifts for his assistant, Miss Montgomery. Gallo didn't even object. He just stared at his legal pad, defeated. Let's talk about the $642,000 in the Zenith Trust, Arthur said, approaching the stand. Your husband withdrew this money from an equity line on your premarital home. Did you authorize this? I did not. He forged my signature on the electronic authorization forms, Daisy said calmly. Your Honor, Arthur said, turning to the judge, we submitted the forensic handwriting analysis in our supplemental discovery this morning. It conclusively proves Mr. Henderson forged the documents. Lucian buried his face in his hands. But here's the truly fascinating part, Arthur continued, turning back to Daisy. Mrs. Henderson, you are a CEO of a logistics firm. You understand complex financial routing better than anyone. When did you discover the Zenith Trust account? On September 10th, Daisy replied. 7 days after he opened it. I have automatic alerts set up for any credit inquiry or equity draw attached to my social security number. And what did you do when you discovered the theft? Daisy looked directly at Lucian. I didn't freeze it immediately. I hired a private forensic accounting firm to trace the routing numbers associated with the Zenith Trust, because Lucian wasn't just using the account to hide marital assets. He was using it to run his own business funds through a shell company to avoid paying corporate taxes and, more importantly, to hide the fact that he was embezzling from his remaining 3 clients. The entire courtroom erupted. Reporters in the back row began furiously typing on their laptops. Gallo's head snapped up, his jaw hitting the floor. Lucian looked as if he had been physically struck by lightning. Objection! Gallo practically screamed, his voice breaking. Your Honor, this is a family court proceeding. These are baseless, highly defamatory accusations of federal crimes that have absolutely nothing to do with this divorce. They have everything to do with this divorce, Mr. Gallo, Arthur roared back over the noise of the gallery. Your client is claiming he needs half of my client's estate because he is destitute. He isn't destitute. He's a thief hiding stolen client funds in an account managed by his mistress. Order! Order in my courtroom. Judge Harrison hammered his gavel until the wood nearly splintered. The room slowly quieted down, though the heavy breathing of the shocked spectators remained audible. The judge looked at Arthur, his eyes wide. Mr. Pendleton, tell me you have proof of these allegations, because if you do not, I will hold you in contempt right now. Arthur casually pulled a thick-bound dossier from his briefcase and handed it to the bailiff. Your Honor, Exhibit G, a 200-page report compiled by the forensic accounting firm of Grant & Thorne. It details every illegal wire transfer from Vanguard Capital into the Zenith Trust. We took the liberty of sending a copy of this report to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, as well as the Securities and Exchange Commission yesterday afternoon. Oh. Lucian let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. He slumped forward onto the defense table, his forehead resting on the polished wood. Daisy watched him from the stand, her expression entirely serene. She had promised him she would bury him so deep he wouldn't see daylight. And Daisy Henderson always kept her promises. The silence that descended upon courtroom 304 was no longer just tense. It was entirely suffocating. The air felt heavy, charged with the undeniable reality that a man's life had just been systematically, entirely dismantled on public record. Judge Harrison flipped through the first 10 pages of the Grant and Thorne forensic report, his eyes scanning the dense rows of routing numbers, offshore LLC registrations, and matched withdrawal slips. With every page he turned, the color drained further from Lucian's face. Lucian wasn't just looking at a ruined marriage anymore. He was staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. Richard Gallo stood up. He didn't look slick. He didn't look confident. He looked like a man who realized he was standing on a sinking ship, holding a heavy iron anchor. "Your Honor," Gallo said, his voice completely devoid of its usual theatrical resonance. "In light of these new developments and the introduction of evidence suggesting ongoing federal crimes that were not disclosed to me by my client, I find myself in an impossible ethical bind. I cannot effectively represent Mr. Henderson without suborning perjury or implicating my own firm in a cover-up. I must formally request to withdraw as counsel of record for the petitioner, effective immediately." Lucian's head snapped up. "Richard, you can't do that. We have an agreement. You can't leave me here, Mr. Hath." "Henderson, do not speak to me," Gallo said, his tone dripping with professional self-preservation. He gathered his briefcase, violently snapping the brass locks shut. "You lied to me. You used my firm to facilitate an extortion plot, and you kept me in the dark about embezzling client funds. We are done. The request to withdraw is granted, Mr. Gallo," Judge Harrison said, not even looking up from the dossier. "Though I expect you to make yourself fully available to the State Ethics Board and whatever federal investigators come knocking." But Gallo gave a stiff nod, turned on his heel, and walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance. Lucian was now completely alone at the petitioner's table. The handsome, well-dressed victim had been reduced to an isolated, sweating fraud. Judge Harrison closed the dossier and set it aside, resting his hands flat on his polished mahogany bench. He looked down at Lucian with a mixture of profound disgust and weary disbelief. "Mr. Henderson," the judge began, his voice echoing loudly in the cavernous room, "in my 22 years on the bench, I have presided over thousands of divorces. I have seen spouses lie, cheat, and steal. But the sheer audacity of what you attempted to execute in this courtroom today is in a class of its own." Lucian opened his mouth, perhaps to plead or to beg, but no words came out. His throat was too dry, his panic too absolute. "You did not just lie," Judge Harrison continued, his voice rising in volume and severity. "You weaponized a very real, very tragic reality of domestic abuse. You coached a witness to fabricate a traumatic event, and you attempted to use the authority of this court to steal a woman's company, her home, and her reputation. You tried to brand your wife as an abuser, simply because she had the intelligence to uncover your thievery." The judge turned his attention to Daisy, who still sat in the witness box, completely poised, radiating a quiet, unshakable power. "Mrs. But Henderson, your motion to dismiss the restraining order is granted with prejudice," the judge declared. "Furthermore, given the overwhelming evidence of financial fraud and marital dissipation, I am striking Mr. Henderson's petition for spousal support. You will not pay him a single dime. I am granting a full and immediate dissolution of this marriage, awarding you 100% of the marital assets, the primary residence, and exclusive control of your business entities." "Thank you, Your Honor," Daisy said, her voice smooth and level. "As for the Zenith Trust," Judge Harrison said, his eyes narrowing as he looked back at Lucian, "I am issuing an immediate judicial freeze on that account. However, Since the funds within it are highly likely to be the proceeds of federal crimes, they are no longer a family court matter. The judge picked up his gavel. Mr. Henderson, I am holding you in direct criminal contempt for rampant premeditated perjury. Bailiff, take him into custody. He will remain in the county jail without bond until I decide on an appropriate sentence, or until the federal authorities come to collect him. Whichever happens first. No. Wait, please, Your Honor. Lucian screamed, scrambling backward as two large uniformed bailiffs approached him. It was Chloe's idea. I'm broke. I have nothing. The bailiffs grabbed him by the arms, forcefully wrenching his hands behind his back. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room. Take him away, Judge Harrison ordered. As Lucian was dragged toward the side door, kicking and sobbing like a petulant child, he locked eyes with Daisy one last time. He was searching for any sign of mercy, any flicker of the love she had once held for him. But all he found was a cold, impenetrable void. She simply watched him go, the ghost of a triumphant smirk playing at the corner of her lips. The heavy, brass-studded oak doors of courtroom 304 swung outward with a resounding thud, feeling less like an exit and more like the unsealing of a tomb. As Daisy stepped across the threshold and out of the suffocating, mahogany-paneled purgatory, the stagnant air of the courtroom was instantly replaced by the sharp, echoing clamor of the Cook County Courthouse hallway. The media frenzy had already materialized, brewing like a sudden violent storm. The handful of stringer reporters who had been sitting in the gallery had frantically texted their news desks the moment the forensic accounting report was dropped onto the judge's bench. Now a swarm of local news cameras, aggressive freelance photographers, and microphone-wielding journalists had congregated in a tight blockade near the bank of brass elevators. They were hungry, buzzing with the electric anticipation of catching the formidable CEO who had just publicly, surgically eviscerated her husband on public record. Arthur Pendleton walked faithfully by Daisy's side, a wide, deeply satisfied grin plastered across his face. He instinctively shifted his shoulders, preparing to act as a physical barrier against the impending press pool. But Daisy didn't falter. Her posture remained impossibly straight, her chin tilted at the exact angle of a woman who had just conquered a continent, not merely won a divorce settlement. But before the first flashbulb could fire, before the closest reporter could even shout her name over the din, a frantic, hysterical shriek echoed from the far end of the marble corridor. "Daisy! Daisy, wait! Please." The sound was sharp, desperate, and entirely unhinged. The parting sea of reporters turned their heads in unison. It was Chloe. The 26-year-old mistress looked nothing like the delicate, tragic victim she had portrayed on the witness stand just 2 hours prior. The carefully constructed facade had melted entirely. Her oversized, innocent beige cardigan was twisted and wrinkled, hanging off her shoulder. Her meticulously applied mascara had turned into thick, toxic black rivers running down her pale, blotchy cheeks. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she practically sprinted down the hallway, her designer heels clicking erratically, clutching her expensive leather handbag against her chest as if it were a life preserver in a boiling ocean. Arthur immediately stepped forward, raising a flat, imposing hand. "Miss Montgomery, back away. You are encroaching on my client, and I will have courthouse security remove you." But Daisy gently reached out, placing a single calm hand on her lawyer's forearm. She signaled him to stand down. She wanted to hear this. Chloe practically threw herself forward, skidding to a halt just a few feet away from Daisy's pristine navy blue pumps. She was trembling so violently that her teeth were visibly chattering. "Daisy, you have to help me," Chloe sobbed, the words tumbling out of her mouth in a jagged, panicked rush. "I just got off the phone. I called my uncle the second the judge started talking about the money. He's a real estate lawyer in Peoria, but he explained it to me. He told me what the Zenith Trust actually means. My name is on it, Daisy. I signed the incorporation papers for the LLC. I'm the sole primary beneficiary. I am well aware of the corporate structuring, Chloe, Daisy replied. Her voice was conversational, carrying the mild, detached interest of someone discussing a delay in the morning mail. You don't understand, Chloe shrieked, tears flying from her face as she shook her head frantically. If that money is stolen, if Lucian actually embezzled from his clients and hid it in that account, my uncle said it doesn't matter that I didn't steal it. He said it makes me an accessory to federal wire fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny. He said the feds don't care who moved the money, they care whose name is holding the bag. Chloe dropped to her knees, oblivious to the cameras that had suddenly pivoted to capture her total breakdown. I didn't know. You have to believe me, I didn't know he was a thief. Lucian told me it was his year-end bonus. He told me he was moving it offshore to protect it from the divorce because you were trying to bleed him dry. He promised me it was safe. I just wanted a nice life, Daisy. I didn't want to go to a federal prison. Please tell the judge. Tell the police I was just a pawn. You have all the power here. They'll listen to you. Daisy looked down at the weeping, shattered girl on the floor. For a fleeting fraction of a second, the universe paused. Daisy could have offered a shred of grace. She could have acknowledged that Lucian was a master manipulator who had undoubtedly spun a web of lies to ensnare this naive, greedy junior assistant. But then Daisy remembered the audio recording. She remembered sitting in her cold Seattle hotel room, thousands of miles away, listening to the digital playback. She remembered the sound of Chloe's cruel, arrogant laughter echoing off the marble countertops of the home Daisy had bought and paid for. She remembered Chloe calling her a stuck-up bitch. She remembered Chloe eagerly conspiring to fabricate a domestic violence incident, perfectly willing to brand an innocent black woman as a volatile, violent aggressor, all to secure a multi-million-dollar payout and a luxury mansion. The temperature in the hallway seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. A nice life, Daisy mused. Her baritone voice dropped to a terrifyingly quiet register, yet it carried clearly over the hushed murmurs of the surrounding press. You wanted a nice life, Chloe, and you sat down, looked at the empire I spent 15 years bleeding to build, and decided the easiest way to get your nice life was to steal mine. Chloe looked up, her eyes wide, breathless and terrified. You weren't tricked into trying to ruin me, Daisy continued, taking one slow, deliberate step forward until her shadow fell entirely over the kneeling girl. You sat in that witness chair today, looked a judge in the eye, and tried to convince the world I was a violent monster. You were perfectly happy to destroy my reputation, my career, and my freedom, all so you could play house with my money. Chloe violently shook her head again, gripping her own hair. I'm sorry. I swear to God I'm so sorry. You aren't sorry you did it, Chloe, Daisy corrected, her tone as hard and unforgiving as a diamond. You're just sorry that I was smarter than you. You're sorry that you got caught. You wanted to be the woman of the house. You wanted Lucian's stolen wealth. Well, congratulations, you achieved your goal. The offshore account is in your name. You own it. Daisy leaned down slightly, locking eyes with a hyperventilating mistress. And in about 48 hours, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the SEC are going to freeze every single asset you possess. They are going to raid your apartment, seize your electronics, and indict you as a co-conspirator to a multi-million-dollar federal fraud scheme. You wanted the ring and the money, Chloe. Now you get the indictment. I hope Lucian's bonus was worth it. Daisy straightened up, completely unbothered, and turned her back on the sobbing, ruined girl. She resumed her walk toward the elevators, the sea of reporters instinctively parting to let her through. They didn't ask questions. The sheer, overwhelming aura of absolute victory radiated from her so intensely that it silenced the entire corridor. She stepped into the waiting brass elevator, Arthur filing in right behind her. "Arthur," Daisy said, her eyes fixed forward as the doors began to slide shut. "Yes, Daisy," Arthur replied, adjusting his briefcase. "Draft the press release immediately. Keep it incredibly clean, entirely clinical. State that the marriage has been formally dissolved by the court, that my company's assets and reputation remain completely intact and uncompromised, and that I'm fully cooperating with all federal authorities regarding the financial discrepancies discovered solely within Mr. Cothler Henderson's personal business ventures. No gloating. Just facts. Consider it done," Arthur smiled warmly. "And congratulations, Daisy. It was a masterclass." The heavy brass doors slid completely shut, instantly cutting off the blinding flashes of the cameras and the agonizing, pathetic sound of Chloe Montgomery's wails echoing down the courthouse hall. The silence of the elevator was luxurious. Daisy reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her phone. The screen was lit up with notifications. She had a 3 p.m. international conference call with her logistics routing team in Tokyo to optimize their Pacific shipping lanes. And she still needed to finalize the multi-million-dollar acquisition of a state-of-the-art warehouse facility in Dallas before the end of the business day. Her life, her real, beautiful, wildly successful, hard-earned life was waiting for her. She had excised the parasitic cancer from her home. She had relentlessly protected the empire she built from nothing. And she had reminded everyone in spectacular fashion exactly why she was the one in charge. The victim had never been in the courtroom today, only the victor. What an absolutely jaw-dropping courtroom showdown. Daisy proved to the world that when you try to bury a queen, you better make sure she isn't holding the shovel. Lucien and Chloe thought they could manipulate the legal system and exploit tired stereotypes to steal a fortune, but they severely underestimated the power, intelligence, and sheer ruthlessness of a woman who built her own empire. What did you think of Daisy's brilliant counterattack and her icy final words to Chloe? Let us know your favorite twist in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible true-life drama.